Hi, I'm Cammy Watkins, and in high school, I was involved in choir and theater, and which was really interesting because I was painfully shy. I had trouble making friends. My brother was like, you're gonna have to make friends, and you should probably also try to make some Black friends. And I was like, but nobody likes me. But I could sing. I always sang. And so I joined the choir, and then through choir I met a few other super shy singers, and they were also doing theater. So the first play that I ever did, so most things I did were always with me singing, and that was fine, but I never just did talking where I had to act. And I was like, I can't act, I can't do those things. So the first play I was in was funny because the character, we were all in an insane asylum of individuals, and my character in particular was a woman who didn't talk ever, except for to give these like long rants of the things that she hates. And it was because like one day she used to, I guess, complain and nag all the time, and her husband told her to shut up, and so she did. And that's why I was in the insane asylum. And I think it's just serendipitous, and the irony is not lost on me that when I talk about why I decided I needed to run was because I told myself either you stop complaining or you do something about it. And so yeah, that was me in high school.
So my name is Naomi Hattaway, and I was homeschooled my whole entire childhood. So when I think back to me in middle school and high school, it was such an interesting time because my nucleus was my family. It wasn't me and my peers or classmates. But one of the things that I remember very distinctly about middle school was wanting to play sports. And we weren't really a sporty family. I really wasn't a sporty kid. But in order to play sports, you had to have a team. And so we had to make arrangements with our local school here in Omaha. It was a Christian school. And my mom really navigated the introductions to the principal and to the school administration to say, like, could my daughter play sports with you? And this was a long time ago, before homeschooling was as mainstream as it is today. And I remember walking into that school. I didn't know anybody, and I also didn't know how to play volleyball. And I was so encouraged because everyone just welcomed me in, and I felt for the first time like I was part of a community. So to your point about how apropos it is that that play was a reminder of what you needed to do in the future about stop complaining or do something about it. It really set the stage for me and how important community is, and having a group of people that you can come around, that come around you, whether you know what you're doing or not, and let you be a part of something. So,
awesome. Hi everyone, my name is Jasmine. I went to middle school here at McMillan Junior High and high school at Northwest High, and I did sports too. I was not on the A team at all. So I was always on the B teams or the junior varsities, but it helped me get out of my shell. Like I was, shy, but I had friends and things like that, did choir, but it really helped me to gain confidence in different things, right? And try different things. And in high school, I went out for track and field junior year. I was like, I'm just gonna long jump, because when I started seeing everybody sprint, I was like, yeah, I'm not that fast. So I did long jump junior year, and senior year came around. I was like, no, I'm not gonna do track anymore. And the coaches was like, no, but you can come help us, right? And I was like, okay, I can do that. And got to get a rapport with everybody on the track team and really help out. And at the end of the season, I ended up lettering in track for being the coach's assistant. Oh. So, just getting outside of my comfort zone and just doing stuff and doing different things I was in honors classes, and everybody's like, how are you in honors classes? Because I'm smart. But it really, got me to see that you don't have to be one set of a person. You can do so many different things and bring all of yourself to the table. And I guess that's what really set me up too. Being a person who was always in the background doing the work, but running for office, you had to step in front. But knowing that at those point in times where I was playing on teams and singing in choir and things like that, it's like, okay, I can take that and step in front and actually run for office. So,
yeah, it's so interesting because I think like exactly every time, and I remember while we were all running and we'd be talking about stuff or we'd be on forums together, and I'd like, that's exactly the same. I can't say that now because it's exactly the same reason. Like I was always the behind the scene person, but I think it's interesting, like team sports or like theater and arts, it's all collaborative. Yeah. And I felt like my whole life, like leading up to this, being a nonprofit, and all of us have worked either in some form of for-profit, but mostly nonprofit. Mm-hmm. It's so much about that ingenuity. And I think when I look at, I would never have drawn the line from who I was as a kid in high school to where I am today. I just wouldn't have. I wouldn't have thought that I would be in this space and a person, but I knew that like early on, I knew that there was a purpose because there were like lots of times that I could have almost died as a kid because I was just clumsy. Like my mom tells a story that I almost fell into a sewer because I was so little. And I was skipping carefree across a large sewer grate at my aunt's wedding. So I think it was in like Ohio. And I missed the sidewalk and fell in, but my grandma caught me. And everybody was like, we didn't know how that old woman could move that fast. and then there's like times I've almost been hit by cars and all these things. And I like all of these moments when I probably should not have been okay, I made it so it's like, so I have a purpose. Mm-hmm. There's a purpose and a reason. And if I do not live up to that, then I'm squandering my reason for being on this planet. And so then I just like, well, I don't know how I'm supposed to help. And everything was just like serendipitous. So like my first job was working at Head Start CFDC. And I had actually sent my mom, because I was living with my mom, graduated from college, came back to Omaha, and I had asked her, can you go pick up an application from Boys and Girls Club? And she went to the one where Blackburn High School is now. She went in the wrong door. And so one side was Boys and Girls Club and the other side was Head Start. And she happened to walk
application.
in. Mm-hmm. Yep, because back then you got paper applications. I
know, all of our stories are way back then, so long ago.
So we're just gonna come on back. It's the outfits you're wearing today still, but just different.
Different technology.
No, yes. And so yeah, she got that, and I even applied, and I was like, well, maybe this is just like their parent company, Child and Family Development Corps, because it was still kids, and it just kind of took off from there. Everything else just kind of aligned, and it just felt right to be doing work where I was helping other people, but not in this like weird savior way, but that it was like, let me be living amongst, because all of these stories of these kids is the stories that I had in the families.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting that you talked about having been away from Omaha and coming back, because that's my story also. I was born in North Platte in the country, and then when we moved to Omaha, I felt out of place because it felt like everyone else was from here and their families had been from here. And then we moved away. I lived overseas in several places and all over in the United States. And then coming back to Omaha, it really was an opportunity to figure out what it was that I wanted to do and how I wanted to have an impact. And so when I look back on my life, I was a library page, which I don't think they call them that anymore at the libraries, but I would stack books, and I would also, back in the day when they had the cards that you would have to stamp the date on when someone would check out the book. And I remember being so excited to help people. So someone would come into the library and they would say, I want to read a book about a dog, or I want to read a book about gardening. And I was able to help navigate them to what it was they needed to find more education and more knowledge about. And so then I think if I fast forward, those are the things that still matter a lot to me. It's being able to connect people and point people to resources and help people figure out what it is that they're passionate about and what their purpose is. And I think it's just so cool to be able to be a grown woman now and then look back at those little connecting of the dots to see when I was back in middle school and high school, what mattered then is still what matters to me now, and then being able to turn it into something that is either a job or a volunteer opportunity or something to be able to give back to the community. So it's cool.
Yeah, and I think it's a trending theme is we all we left.
Yeah.
And we still hear that today of young people wanting to leave Omaha. For me, I was 17 and I was like, in order for me to succeed, I have to leave Omaha. And I went away to school. But again, I came back and finished school here at UNO. And through that time, I ended up having my oldest son and was in an unhealthy relationship and dealing with childhood trauma, where I made some, pretty rough decisions that changed the trajectory of how my life was turning out. And had contact with law enforcement and criminal justice system involved in things. And that's when, for me, it was like, okay, so Jasmine, what are you doing with your life? You got to figure this out. And going through school, I was here at UNO, got my undergrad in biology because I was either going to be a rapper or a doctor.
Not a long jumper?
Not a long jumper. I'm not a rapper or a doctor. So you can always have what you want in your mind, but you'll have a different trajectory, I promise. And then just realizing at that point in time, it's policy and advocacy became really big for me because when I was going through my struggles, I couldn't find a job. And I was like, I didn't have a felony conviction or anything like that. But it's like, if I'm having this hard of a time getting a job, then oh my goodness, people who have felony convictions, like, what are they going through? And for me, that was really when I started stepping up with my voice. And when I went to grad school, it was about public health, and I really focused a lot on substance use and how that really compounds with the criminal justice system and things like that. So like you said, serendipitous, everything just started lining up. After I graduated from my master's program, I had my advisor call me. He's like, so there's this position open with this coalition around high-risk drinking, apply for it. And I ended up with that job, and everything just kept falling in the line, which really got me involved in the community and using my voice. And I think that is a part where it's like that shy little girl who didn't want to sing in front of nobody, who really didn't want to talk in front of nobody, now is using her voice for people who don't feel like they can talk to people in power and things like that. And I promise, in high school, I did not like American government, politics, anything like that. And it just amazes me now, like, no, this is what it's all about, and really trying to dig into how do we get involved, how do we get younger people involved in creating change, because people actually listen to younger people versus adults who just keep talking.
Yeah, right. Well, did they ever talk about politics in high school or in middle school for you all?
Not in the sense of being politicians, but just like the government classes and how, the different branches and all that stuff. But I was like, I don't care.
Well, and I think so for us, we didn't have traditional classes because it was just our family homeschooling. But I think that one of the things that's so important as I watch my kids go through middle school and high school is that those different branches, we pay so much attention to the federal branches and to the president. But we all know how important local races are. We all ran for municipal city races, city council and mayor. And when you look at the power that those folks have, that's what impacts every day. That's what impacts, we always joke about like trash and snow and roads, but that's what impacts the library being open or not. That's what impacts public Wi-Fi. That's what impacts Parks and Rec and whether the bathrooms are unlocked and open. So it's all these little things, and I think that's really important too, to match up lived experience, what you know to be true because of the childhood that you had, and then match that to something that's seemingly so unattainable as local politics. So I think that's interesting too about what we've all learned about being involved with politics and how that matches up with community work.
Well, and I think it's interesting because I was trying to think back of like, had I ever really got involved? So my parents, we didn't talk about it. I believe my parents had always voted. My dad was in the military. And then once they got divorced, then we moved back up here. My mother worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office as a legal secretary. So she was surrounded by judges and attorneys. And in the U.S. Attorney's Office, the head U.S. attorney changed over with the presidential election. So that was clearly something that was part of our lives, but we just never talked about it in that way. And I think that was probably to my benefit. And I remember in high school Hal Dobb was mayor circa 1990s. And he like only through a leadership program, because I was in all honors classes as well, but that was like partially my like inner needing to always be the best, but always failing, which we'll get to that we all lost. And so it's like, even though like many things in my life seem to like fall into place, there's lots of times when I worked super hard, but I didn't attain or I didn't win. And I think that is a stronger piece in who I am and my character than always getting what I had always striven to do. But I remember that like Hal Dobb was in this leadership program with us, and it was right about the time that they were talking about having the helicopters around the city, for adding helicopters to the law enforcement, and having like my grandmother's house was in North Omaha for 22nd and Lothrop, and I just remember listening to other people and then watching the news and hearing what like the community members in North Omaha are like, what is this going to do? And so then I had this opportunity where we were in this leadership class and Hal Dobb was talking to us, and you know, he's doing the like politician spiel and trying to just talk down to the kids, and I got a chance to answer a question, and it was completely uncharacteristic for me to actually raise my hand and ask a question of an authority figure that was going to challenge them. But for some reason I did it, because I was just like, I can't let this moment pass. And I asked him about the helicopters. It's like, there's a lot of people that are concerned about it, talking about noise. What does this do? And he's like, well, it'll be high enough in the sky that it won't impact, you won't be able to hear it. And I was like, if it's so high in the sky that you can't hear it, then how are you gonna see anything? And then what's the purpose? And he just like bristled off and then just moved on and didn't answer my question. I remember sitting there like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, you get to just ignore it. And it was like, Andy was condescending to me. Like, and I remember being so mad, like, how dare you treat me this way? And so that might have been
seed planting.
Yeah, the little sparking little baby Cammy being like, well, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about a little bit about the loss piece of the races. So I don't know, I'm guessing all three of us went into this campaign with intensive winning. You run to win, right? But we all three had different layers of complications and complexities around what it was like to run in Omaha. I would like to have thought that 2021 would have been the year that we could be a little bit more progressive and a little bit more open-minded. What would you say was the biggest I didn't win but lesson?
For me, it was doing something that you know, the people who are normally in politics say couldn't be done, and that was run a grassroots campaign, bringing people who were advocates and activists into a political sphere and running a campaign based off of organizing models, if you will. We didn't do a traditional campaign. We were out in the community. We did events. We sold T-shirts. This was like true organizing grown to a campaign level, and the amount of votes that I got for the amount of money that we brought in and spent was phenomenal based off of the other candidates that ran. So I think it's really, we did something people said that can't be done. Yeah.
Well, and for me, it was, I ran in West Omaha, and it was just very important that we be able to talk about things that were important to me and that I think were important to most of Omaha, whether that's affordable housing, or addressing racism and calling it what it is. And that's not something that typically politicians in West Omaha were doing. And I was told over and over, you know, that's probably not the best idea, and you probably shouldn't do that. And just as a fair warning, that's not going to get you the results that you want. But what happened as a result is that now folks are talking. There is conversations on social media about affordable housing. My opponent, who kept his seat, also started talking about affordable housing the last few weeks of the election. And I think that's really important to be able to say, that's a win, and yours is a win. What would your win, even though you lost?
Yeah, so I would say for me, when I started to run, when I first started thinking about it, Chris Jerome had not officially announced that he wasn't running. And I know that our entire system is set up to benefit the incumbent in this city. And in most cities, really, for local politics, which is something that needs to change. And so I was like, my whole thing is I want to elevate issues that won't be talked about if I'm not in the race. Like, I'm in Midtown, downtown. It's moderate income to wealthy income, and people ignore all of the lower income families. Having worked at Habitat, some of my families live in the district that I live in now, but if you were to ask people where do lower income people live, they would never say where I live today. And so my whole goal was I want to elevate these issues and I want to talk about these things that are problems for people all over this city and here. And so and then also running as an independent. I never set out to make a statement about the political parties. It's like, this is just, I'm doing what's right for me. And I want to be authentic to myself. And I had lots of conversations with people about, it seems like people get into public office and then they start to compromise why they were there. Like if you look at some leaders, like would them who started in that office 10 years ago respect the them that's in the office today? And I was asking like mentors of mine, how do I make sure that that doesn't happen to me if I win? And part of it was I can't start to compromise on the small things, because if you move that line, what makes it easier for you to move the next line? And so I kind of also went in wanting to change the game and wanting to have the conversation of why do we just do this? Why do we play this party politics? Why do we get so nasty to each other? Why do you have to tear people down in order for us? It's like, aren't we just all supposed to be voting for the best person? And this idea of like picking the less of two evils just shouldn't be a thing. And we're seeing huge conversations now. In the spite of the fact that I lost in certain media journalistic areas decided to try to tell us that the progressive movement died in that moment. There was no mandate against the progressive movement. Only 32% of our city voted. And then we still saw, if you combine the numbers of individuals who voted for all of us that didn't win, that's still a large number of people.
It's such a huge number. And then will you talk a little bit more, because you mentioned super briefly about bringing in activists and advocates, and would you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's a super big part of it. Not going beyond just going to the polls to vote, and bringing folks together for the larger long-term purpose, because I think that's important.
So, 2020 brought us a lot, right? The pandemic, the death of George Floyd, all the riots and the racial unrest and the battle with the law enforcement and things like that. And so there were so many people who were on the front lines of that who felt like they were not being heard at all. That outside of if they don't protest, if they don't hear us, then what? And to have a candidate who has those same kind of values, who have been on the front line too, they actually felt like they had someone they could back and really feel like there would be change in the city. And so when I say bringing advocates and activists along, they finally saw someone who looked like them, represented what they they valued. And for our campaign to turn out almost 200 volunteers in a municipal race is unheard of. So people really felt like they had something to look forward to. And I think bringing those individuals to the center, so people could actually see, and I think that's like the work that we do in general, is getting people to see people for who they are, and that's people, outside of the labels of advocate and activist, because a lot of them got labeled as bad people when they're not. They were tired of the same old, and they wanted change for their lives to be better, for their families' lives to be better, and just uniting people across the city on those values of let's make Omaha better for everybody. I think it really turned out a lot of people.
Well, when you look at our history because I love history, and I've started to look at, if you look at the history of our state, of our city, of our country, every time something changed, it's because people spoke up and were just tired of seeing something that they didn't like, and as opposed to being afraid, and we champion that. But in the moment, and so looking back and what we're taught in schools, the civil rights movement, the American Revolution, all of those things, the fight for LGBTQIA2S+ rights, all of those started with people who were tired, and then they started to speak out, and everyone is judging. And like when you said how people were like, these are bad people that are protesting or that are speaking out against, they're not bad people. They're the change makers.
Well, and you even just said speaking out against, and I think we all started talking about what if we reframed it and speaking up for. And that was one of the things, I think if we look at local government, it's typically folks that are in power because of money. And we represented, along with some other candidates, the opportunity to represent the community for equality and for equity. And I think the thing that I was so impressed with too around access to local government was talking about education, talking about what it is, what does an incumbent mean, and saying just very plain language, an incumbent is someone who currently holds the office, to be able to start taking the shame out of not knowing about local government. And when I think about the young people that got involved with all of our campaigns, the thing that was so cool when you talk with them is that they found a place they belonged. There was no judgment about how they engaged. So it might have been that they dropped literature off for us. It might have been that they helped with the website creation. Some folks did language translation. And I think that that's one of the encouraging things I would say to those of you that are watching this is don't let your age be something that restricts you from being involved with local government. We have set the stage for future candidates to be accessible to young people. And so I'm excited to see that continue. Maybe we can just talk about the maybe top 2 issues that we could correlate what we ran on and what we ran for with how it might interact with or intersect with young folks.
Yeah, so I think for me, the values we ran on were probably became a bigger rallying cry for everyone than the platforms themselves. Because the food security, public Wi-Fi, equitable housing, and community care investments were super important, but what people resonated with was the equity, sustainability community. And to exactly both your points, people hadn't seen a person speaking on that. And for young people, the sustainability, the equity, and the community were huge. Like we had so many high school students that were part of it. And I asked them, that's why I have my Powers the New Pretty shirt on. I asked them, what are the spaces in which they feel they have power? And I asked the whole room. And many of them said, well, maybe it's arts, it's my journalism, it's where I get to express myself. And we've made power a dirty word, but it's power that got us into this mess, and it's gonna have to be reclaimed, reshared, repurposed power that's gonna get us out of it. And it has to start with those folks that are gonna lead the future. So I would say stepping into the sustainability of not only sustainability for our environment that people bought into, but sustainability for future generations.
For me, it was from the jump, the police accountability and public safety, if you will, where everyone needs to be feel safe in our public. When they come in contact with law enforcement, and with my background in criminal justice reform work, it's always around the contact when it comes to people who are dealing with mental health and substance use. At that point in time, they're not committing these horrible crimes. They're stuck in cycles that they can't get out of, and we need to be there to help them versus punishing them and criminalizing them. So that was one of the big main things. And then because of the police reform and everything that was going on, that had to be a big part of it, is holding law enforcement accountable to how they interact with community members from different areas of our city. And then I think it was that equity piece, and equity not just in race, because I really did bring that up. Is like we have to become better at being inclusive and equitable in Omaha if we want people to stay. And if we want people to come here. And that fed a lot into our young professionals. Being a part of Urban League of Nebraska Young Professionals for years, chairing the Civic Engagement Committee, and even before that, working, creating youth advocacy programs and things like that, which led into creating Black and Brown Legislative Day, which educates youth and people of color on how our government here at the state and local levels work. It's always been about how do we ensure people feel welcomed, feel safe, and want to stay. And like I said, I was 17. I was like, I have to leave here. And talking with other youth groups and things like that during the campaign, they're saying the same thing. And we have to get better at it. So those are the two of the things that I was really trying to lift up in the campaign.
Well, I think for mine, equity was a through line also. And language access really became something that we talked a lot about. And language access from a standpoint of whether it's American Sign Language or and having that interpretation be provided at local government meetings. language access when it comes to having our documentation translated. If you go to the city of Omaha, the city hall, and ask for something in a paper form, it's only in English.
Yep.
And that's something that we can't have as a thing going forward. And when I connect that with values, it's belonging and welcoming. Mm-hmm. You know, we have over 88 languages are spoken in our Omaha public school system. Mm-hmm. And if we continue to have a city who prioritizes English only, that's just not very welcoming. And so that really became accessibility, disability rights, and all of those things also were super important to me. But it all comes down to all three of us. How is it that we can make our city better for everybody? And making sure that we prioritize all age groups and prioritize all nationalities and ethnicities. And your point too is so good about we have to make sure that that sustainability and legacy lets the younger folks, you all, come to the table and bring your power.
Yes. Well, and I want to, and as we kind of like wrap up and think about what do we want for our folks that are watching to know, I would love for you both to talk about, because we embodied those things. We didn't just talk about accessibility, and we didn't just talk about like equity and giving back. You all did it, and we all did it. It showed it in activities. So what was one of the ways that, like, you had cleanups, you had your IDs, like the visual, like, so just share a little bit about what were some of the things that you did, and then which brought in young people, whether we could vote or not, into it.
Well, I think for me, it's always about modeling behavior. So, if you're training a dog, you do it repetitively, and you do the same thing over and over. And so for us, modeling language access was to just do the thing that we were trying to get others to come along with. And there's also something called signaling. And so if you do something repetitively, people will start to be drawn to that. And so I, with my own children, I watch them signal to their friends what values matter to them and what is important to them. And then that's how you start to get your friend group or your community or your leadership group. And I think that what I would encourage folks to always think about is, what are the values that you want to see in the people you surround yourselves with? Because then that's how you start to also attribute and gather power in your friend group, in your school groups, et cetera.
Yes, and I think as you were saying, the values that we had, and we were talking about inclusivity and welcoming, and it was intentionally building out a campaign team of young folks who identified on the LGBTQIS2+ spectrum, who were people of color, had one of the most diverse campaign teams, because that's what we wanted to show, that we all can work towards something. It was including the advocates and the activists, people from the arts community and the music scene. I love music, right? So it was, the events that we had, we were at music venues. We were bringing in people who performed, so that, a lot of our arts and culture community, they're not involved in campaigns. And so in order to make sure that everybody could see themselves in this campaign, we reached out to different people and wanted to include them in that. So I think that's what we did to make sure that our values were showed, and just to bring young people in as well.
Yeah, that like paying the artists. I think there are probably more artists employed in these campaigns than had probably ever been done.
Well, and when you say pay the artists, expand on that. I mean, when we had logos done, when we had T-shirts done, when we had murals, they got paid.
Yes, yeah. And it was interesting because there was did y'all get the survey that had asked from Arts, Amplify Arts? It was the Arts Doc, and they're like, what's one of the best ways to keep artists here? And I was like, pay them. Period. Well, and I think it's reflected in, I identify as an artist.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I went to college on a vocal performance scholarship. So I studied opera. That's not the path I chose to take for my life, because of like the instability of that. I need insurance, I need stability. So when I think of other artists, regardless of whether it's a painter or a journalist or a musician, I want to value. And how do you value? You pay me for my work. And so when we were like, how do I want to communicate this community and equity and involvement, but try to bring in more young people to see that this is possible, and break down all those barriers of like, who is your city council representative or who's your mayor. We did a partnership and did public art projects, and it just felt like
regular,
obvious.
like
Yeah.
every day.
That's interesting. So we're sitting here talking about policy and campaigning and local government, but we haven't really talked about the nitty-gritty of what normally you would be talking about, which is legislation and bills and ordinances. But I think
Streets
that's
and trash.
also but I think that's also important, is because when you bring your value and what you've been through and what you've seen as a gap, that's policy. When you bring the things that you know make your neighbors' lives better, that's policy. And so I guess maybe one of our encouragements to those that are watching, and you'll have an activity that you'll be able to do to kind of connect the things that matter to you and your values and the passions and the things that make you excited when you get up in the morning, will help you navigate how that might connect to policy or how that might connect to local government. And if it's not government, if politics isn't for you, it'll also help you connect with the ways that you can be involved in your community, and just encourage you, regardless of how old you are, of how much you matter to your community and how much the things that you bring really take our community forward. So we'll have that available for you. How should we close out? What's the one thing we want to leave?
I think let's say actually what we ran for.
Oh, that's a good idea.
We never said that. So I'm Cammy Watkins. I use she, her pronouns, and I ran for Omaha City Council, District 3, and I lost, but I still won.
Naomi Hattaway. I ran for Omaha City Council, District 6. I also use she, her pronouns, and I think it's also important to say we got a lot of votes. Like, we didn't lose, and we didn't get any
546 votes off.
Yeah, and like in the thousands of votes. So it's important to say.
Yeah.
My name is Jasmine Harris, and I ran for mayor of Omaha. And like they said, I came in third, shy 1,100 points to being the person that challenged Gene Stop.